Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. Keep that hour in your head. By the end, you'll hear about a street that exists for one eye only, and men who bought deeds to walk it. A traveling optician stepped off the noon train with a trunk and a promise. His name was Silas Quell, a neat coat, wire spectacles, and a salesman's patience. He set a velvet card on the depot bench that read, "Free eye tests and stereoscope demonstrations." People came because free is a gentle word, and the sun made a white sheet on the platform. Quell spoke softly, which made everyone lean in. He asked 2 questions in the same warm tone. "Where are you from? What time is it?" He said eyes and clocks both drift when no one checks them. Then he opened the trunk and showed twin photographs mounted side by side. Bridges, streets, shop fronts with fresh paint, each labeled with a tidy caption. He clipped a pair into a handsome wooden stereoscope and held it to a boy's face. The flat cards jumped into depth and made the street feel close enough to step into. The device was simple and convincing. 2 lenses and 2 pictures taken a few inches apart. The left eye saw left, the right eye saw right, and the brain fused them into the world. Quell called it proof. He said a town is easier to sell when people feel they have already stood in it. A banker named Amos Bell came to look and liked what he saw. Wardell, a railroad solicitor with a hat that kept its shape, joined him by the bench. They were scouting a site for a spur and a depot town, or said they were. Quell produced a sheaf branded Investment Views. Main Street, 3 years mature, trestle at Dry Creek, completed grade, City Hall, east elevation. Some pairs were clear, some had a shaved corner, as if trimmed in haste. No one asked why a corner needed a blade. A young teacher named May Lark handed the scope back and frowned. The left image made her stomach easier than the right, though both showed the same storefront. Quell nodded as if she had passed a test. He said the right image pulls a touch stronger because the future is meant to be enticing. He didn't say edited, he said corrected. May wrote that word in a small notebook. He performed a modest eye check for anyone who paused. A dot of ink, a dangling bead, a short line of type. He asked which eye noticed sooner and whether a headache arrived when shifting between pictures. He wrote every answer in a neat hand. He called it a vision survey. He said a new town deserves healthy eyes. The postmistress watched his pen and liked the order of it. That evening, Quell rented the schoolroom and announced the Parallax Club, 1 night only. Admission by ticket. The name sounded scientific, which is a good way to make money at the edge of a field. May straightened desks, chalked a welcome, and told herself she would not attend. Then she heard Wardell promise first choice of lots to investors who viewed the town in proper depth. She stood in the doorway behind the paying men and listened. Quell dimmed the lamps and began with a gentle lesson about 2 eyes and 1 world. He spoke of grades, freight, and the way depth helps a person decide. He showed pair after pair, a trestle over Dry Creek with men balanced on beams, a square with a courthouse and a bronze soldier's shadow, a hotel porch with rockers and calm coats. The room hummed with the sound of people agreeing with pictures. Then a small mismatch cut through the warmth. On the left card, a dog slept on the steps of a feed store. On the right card, the steps were clean, and the storekeeper stood an inch taller. May asked which one was today. Quell answered without blinking. "Both are correct," he said. "The right is the view, as it will be when you arrive. The left is the survey as it stands." He used survey the way some men use modernization. It ended argument. 2 men took chairs in the front row and spoke on cue. Amos said a town could be built anywhere a ledger made sense and a bank could carry the time between drawings. Wardell said the railroad rewards foresight and civic spirit. Quell closed with a simple pledge. The Parallax Club will help citizens train their eyes to see opportunity. He handed out cards for private fittings and wrote times that sounded precious. May borrowed a pair after the crowd thinned. City Hall, East Elevation. She looked left, then right, and then left again. The weather vane on the right pointed against the smoke on the left. It was the kind of detail people forgive when the bigger promise pleases. She did not forgive it. She put the card back and wrote 4 words. Left is present. Right is promise. Quell packed at sundown and promised to return with more views and a surveyor's map. He asked where everyone was from and what time it was one more time before boarding. The answers pleased him. People spoke as if they already belonged to a place with a courthouse and a square. May walked home on the existing main street. The boards creaked, the hitching rail leaned, and the dog slept in dust, not on steps. She added 1 line to her notebook and underlined it once. Which one asks you for money? The hour you gave me still stands. Keep it close. Silas Quell arrived with pictures and left with partners. 2 men stepped forward as if they had been waiting for his trunk. Amos Bell ran the bank like a ledger that breathed. He liked words that sounded guaranteed. Reserve, coupon, maturity. Wardell wore the railroad's hat and the railroad's patience. He said, spur the way, some men say harvest. He carried letterheads that made towns sit up straighter. They met at noon in the schoolroom and called it a committee. Maylark unlocked the door because the key hung by her desk, and saying no to men who sound official is a hard skill to learn. She stayed to hear which words would land. Wardell set terms with a confident hand. The railroad would consider a depot if the community showed appetite and order. Appetite meant private subscription for a siding. Order meant predictable streets and a square. If citizens see the town, he said, they behave as if it already stands. Amos added his instrument. The bank would hold reservations as certificates. $10 down, secured 2 digits, a lot designation, and a Parallax Club ticket number. We aren't selling dirt, he said. We are selling position in line. He smiled the way calm men smile when the page suits them. Quell laid out pairs and numbered the backs in pencil, left and right. He wrote small marks in margins as people viewed. L for a left preference, R for a right. He said it helped with lenses. It also helped decide which view to show first. May watched men lean into the scope and make small sounds. Surprise, agreement, relief. She wrote 1 sentence and boxed it. The picture chooses the buyer, the salesman chooses the picture. They adopted a harmless rule on paper that carried weight in practice. Subscribers would attend private showings and select from advanced views. No one asked what advanced meant. In practice, it meant edited, with the right card favored. Wardell drew a grid on the chalkboard with a teacher's confidence. Main Street, Depot Street, River Road, corners labeled A through D. A town needs letters before it needs bricks, he said. He didn't sound like a man making it up. Amos wrote names beside letters as money changed pockets. He clipped slips to each name with the 2 digits written neat and straight. Proof of prudence, he said, handing a slip to a farmer who still smelled of harness soap. May asked what happens if the railroad chooses another valley. Wardell said choice follows commitment, not the reverse. Amos said reservations are flexible instruments and can float to adjacent lots. Quell said corrected views represent intent. No one said risk out loud. The word sat in the room and watched the chalk dust fall. They needed a clerk. The postmistress joined them on afternoons because she liked neat stacks and deadlines. She kept a list titled Hesitance and underlined names that returned. The underlines pleased Amos more than he let on. Quell tested eyes between appointments and added another column to his book. Left eye sluggish, right eye keen, headache at shift. He started a small list titled Doubles for the people who reported a brief ghost when moving from left to right. He didn't explain why he cared. He cared because a town sells better when vision fuses on command. A circular appeared on the church door because the pastor believed in civic talk. Parallax Club, private showings for subscribers. The line it drew was tidy and calm. The pastor read the smaller type and frowned, corrected to reflect improvements under consideration. He folded his hands and saved his breath for Sunday. That night, Amos practiced a demonstration with the feed store owner in the back room. 2 twin cards of the same storefront, one with a cracked signboard, one with a fresh plank. Which one would you borrow against if the right one could be true in a month? The owner looked at his shoes and chose the future. A small loan found its page. May finally accepted a ticket because refusing forever is a way to be pushed aside. She sat front row and watched Quell set the room's rhythm. Bridges first, then squares, then hotels, with each pair shown in a deliberate order. When someone asked to see the present again, he said, "We favor the present when it favors us." The sentence worked like window light and gave people permission to keep nodding. A blacksmith named Ruel asked whether the railroad would truly come. Wardle said the company tracks commitment everywhere and tapped the reservation ledger. This is what trains follow. Ruel signed for a corner and left with 10 years of caution, misplaced. Outside the schoolhouse, 2 brothers compared notes. One liked the left card for its dust and honesty. The other liked the right for its polish and promise. They split a lot and laughed like men who thought they had beaten a system that understood them better than they knew. Quell collected those laughs as if they were data points. He drew triangles beside names when pairs of buyers chose together. Triangles meant pressure points and later influence. He staged a parlor salon for wealthier pockets and charged $1. The pianist played slow. Amos spoke in front of a velvet curtain about being early, where profit lives. Wardle said railroads reward those who stand where tracks will be. Quell closed with a seal of words. Depth is proof. People left believing they had seen ahead. The next morning, May borrowed trestle at Dry Creek and tested a simple idea. On the left, a man waved his cap on the timbers. On the right, he had turned his back. Between exposures, something changed. Not much. Enough. She wrote one line on a clean page. If a man moves between cards, what else are we allowed to move? That question stayed warm all day. Quell issued club cards with neat numbering and a tiny dot on a few. Dots unlocked the corrected stack first. Early access, he said, and handed them to men whose voices led other men. A woman named Aubrey asked about houses in the second row, not the first. Quell slid a left card toward her and a right toward her husband. "Do you feel the difference?" he asked softly. They both nodded, and only one of them noticed he had asked 2 different questions. The month closed with a sheet of names under the heading Founders. Dots marked the louder men. May's name sat at the bottom without a dot, which was both accurate and a quiet warning. If 2 almost matching pictures can persuade a room, what happens when the room learns to see only the right one? Keep your hour. We'll check it again when a street appears for one eye and refuses the other. Stereographs begin with a tripod, a sliding bar, and 2 stubborn inches. Quell fixed his camera to the rail, exposed the left plate first and the right plate second, then counted under his breath while telling bystanders not to blink. 2 nearly identical negatives became a mounted pair. The left eye learned the present. The right eye learned the promise under correction. He said it like a physician and sold it like a banker. May watched from the doorway with a teacher's quiet and a small record book. She wrote the steps as rules and circled what people forgot between shutters. Wind moves, hats settle, faces twitch, and shadows creep. Tiny shifts are harmless in one eye and persuasive in 2. She asked herself what changes when persuasion becomes policy, and policy starts drawing maps that money favors. Quell's dark room lived in a borrowed pantry behind the school stove. He worked fast because wet emulsions punish hesitation and reward sequence. Rinse the plates, float the collodion, silver, until the surface turns oily. Expose left, slide the rail, breathe once, expose right, return to trays, and fix before the edge dries. He called it a race against air. May heard another race entirely, against memory willing to forget the first picture. He stamped the backs with tidy titles and mild authority. Main Street, corrected view. Trestle, under consideration. Depot site, proposed alignment. He penciled dates small and added neat initials by the right-hand card. A banker likes dates, a buyer likes initials, and a railroad likes both. May checked a sunbeam on the chalkboard against the left card and found the hour fair. The right card asked for trust and borrowed her patience. He standardized small cheats that looked like care. A broom passed between exposures so the right card kept a cleaner stoop. A signboard straightened so the right enjoyed stronger nails. A storekeeper's posture lifted, and the right forgot fatigue. He called these adjustments clarity for the investor's eye. Wardell nodded because it helped. Amos smiled because it sold. May wrote 2 words and boxed them. Manners, edits. Complaints went into a quiet register no one read aloud. Headache on the shift. Left comfortable and right sharp. Dog present left and absent right. Smoke wrong for the wind on either. Quell logged each note beside payments as if money could soothe mismatch. He trained stewards to present pairs with rhythm. Left first for the cautious, right first for the eager, then repeat, and never let the room rest on the left longer than comfort. People buy the card they last felt inside their head. To help difficult eyes, he introduced alignment sessions in the afternoons. He adjusted focus, narrowed the divider, softened the lamps, and praised patience until fusion arrived. Most left smiling and ready to sign. A few still saw doubling when the right promised too much. Their names entered a short list titled Reassure Again. A tinsmith then lent a stereoscope with adjustable lens spacing. May discovered a trick anyone could learn. Widen the lenses and the left dominates politely. Narrow them and the right pushes the brain into agreement. Devices decide outcomes more often than arguments do. Wardell began ordering pairs that never visited the survey. He wrote captions first and asked Quell to fill frames afterward. Square, paved, hotel, operating, warehouse, advance orders. Quell produced corrected rights and plausible lefts by borrowing streets from nearby towns. He called it regional resemblance. Amos called it acceptable collateral. May called it borrowed truth, and underlined the phrase twice. The club adopted a sentence that fit on a ticket and lost its edges with use. Right view reflects intended improvements. It appeared on cards, ledgers, and the church board. In private showings, Quell sometimes slipped 2 rights to men whose voices led other men. Depth arrived as commanded, doubts left obediently, and a dot appeared by a name. Later those men swore both eyes had agreed with their conscience. May wrote 1 line and closed the book. Conscience is suggestible when the device is kind. When the printer delivered handsome folders for reservation certificates, the right card lived alone behind tissue. The left appeared only if someone insisted and knew to ask. Amos called that economy. Wardell called it efficiency. May called it stacking the jury. A farmer finally asked the question no one liked hearing in a warm room. If the right is promise, who refunds broken promise later? Wardell replied that railroads reward foresight, not hesitance. Amos said deposits float to adjacent lots without pain. Quell said improvements under consideration remain improvements. The farmer signed anyway and slept worse. By month's end, the town spoke in parallax grammar. Did you see it left or right? Replaced, is it built yet? Children practiced with their father's scopes and bragged about fast fusion. Merchants cleaned stoops twice a day just in case. The dog still slept in actual dust on actual steps. May closed her notebook and wrote 3 lines for herself. 2 inches decide stories. Devices decide memories. Right convinces when left is tired. Tomorrow Quell would unveil Investment Views, 2nd series. Some streets would only exist for one eye. The trouble announced itself quietly inside a pair everyone thought they knew. Trestle at Dry Creek had become the club's favorite because its depth felt honest, and the beams read clean. On the left card, the crew stood easy on the timbers and waved their caps. On the right card, 2 men waved, and the foreman who led them was gone. May checked both mounts for trimming, date, and Quell's pencil initials. Everything matched until the faces stopped matching, and her stomach noticed first. What changed between shutters besides wind? She walked to the trestle at noon and found the foreman by the creek. His name was Kip Dalton, a square man with rope burns and careful boots. She showed him the left card, then the right card, and watched his jaw. "That second one isn't wrong," he said. "It just picked a better minute." "Which minute is the record?" May asked, keeping her voice even. "The one they'll pay on," Kip answered, and tapped the timber with 2 knuckles. He did not sound angry. He sounded priced. Back at the schoolroom, Quell called it nerves and drift between exposures. He said the left shows the survey and the right shows the improvement under consideration. "Our duty," he added, "is to help the eye see the intention." Wardell nodded because intention keeps railroads patient. Amos nodded because intention keeps deposits calm. May did not nod. She wrote 1 line in her book and boxed it twice. If the right can dismiss the left, what stops it from replacing it? That evening, the Parallax Club held another ticketed showing. Quell placed Trestle at Dry Creek early and spoke faster through the change. 2 inches and 2 seconds, he said, smiling. The brain fuses what the world already agrees to. A man in the second row asked why the foreman vanished if the day had been calm. Wardell answered for Quell and said, "Men move, work advances, and a survey is not a court oath." Laughter arrived on schedule. Relief followed it. May felt the room decide to keep the right. The pastor found her after the crowd thinned and asked what she saw. She said the discrepancy would be easier to forgive if the club admitted the right card was edited hope rather than the world's next breath. He looked at the ceiling and chose his words. "Hope needs a fence," he said. "Call it a rule. If a picture sells the future, write the future on the back in ink." He walked home before she could thank him for the sentence. Quell did the opposite. The new stamp on the backs read, "Corrected view, not edited hope." He also added a small mark at the bottom edge that only subscribers learn to recognize. May asked him why the mark mattered. "It smooths handling," he said, and changed the subject to lens cleaning. In the ledger, Amos began adding a discreet tick beside buyers who asked no questions after seeing right first. Wardell drew a short line of dots under names that moved others along. The school board invited Quell to do a free afternoon for families who could not afford tickets. He obliged with the same gentle patter and a trimmed program. The foreman's absence did not appear there. May stood in the doorway and counted the seconds he gave each left card before advancing to the right. The count shortened whenever a question might have formed. People cannot argue with a picture they are not allowed to hold. A tinsmith named Garner brought a pair from an old catalog to test Quell's certainty. On the left card, a clock in a square read 10 past 3. On the right, it read 20 to 3. The shadows fit neither. Quell complimented the catalog and said older plates often carry laboratory errors. "Our views come straight from ground and rail," he added, and the room hummed with loyalty. Truth bends when a good sentence leans on it hard enough. May began collecting quiet remarks that slipped out when men forgot themselves. A steward confided that two rights sometimes traveled together when a room needed confidence. Wardell said to Amos at the ledger, "We sell order by showing order." The postmistress noticed Quell now filed complaints under a softer title, Comfort Notes, and moved the list behind a stronger clip. Small words change outcomes when they live near money. She tested Trestle at Dry Creek one more time with a practical trick. She widened the stereoscope's lenses and let the left eye dominate for a moment. Then she narrowed the spacing until the right pushed her brain into agreement. The foreman vanished smoothly, like a coin down a practiced slot. Devices decide outcomes more often than arguments do. She wrote the sentence and underlined devices. Kip Dalton returned to the schoolroom with his crew on a rainy morning and asked to see their picture together. Quell obliged and set the pair on the table. The men laughed at themselves on the left and went still on the right. Kip did not smile. "If I'm not there," he said, "how do I draw hazard pay for walking that beam?" Wardell said the company recognizes risk regardless of one view. Kip asked who signs the form when a picture disagrees with a boot. No one said the word refund. Everyone heard it. Amos started issuing a new paper called a confidence coupon to keep nervous buyers from returning their reservations. The coupon promised priority on adjacent and equivalent frontage if alignments evolved. It sounded generous and cost little until streets existed. People who had never owned a bond now owned something with a coupon and felt dignified by the stub. Dignity carries buyers farther than maps. The pastor tried to set a boundary in public without starting a fight. He suggested that any corrected view used to sell a reservation should be kept on file alongside its survey twin. "Let the left keep the right honest," he said gently. Wardell thanked him, said record-keeping was a virtue, and then failed to ask the clerk for a file drawer. May asked for it and was given a shoebox. The shoebox filled with lefts that no one requested twice. Quell introduced paired assurances at private fittings. He would show left, then left again without comment, and end on the right while handing over the pen. The sequence trained the hand as much as the eye. Buyers signed where the last picture lingered. He recorded the order in his small book with tidy arrows and a letter R circled twice. He told himself he was helping people decide. He was helping the device finish the lesson. May wrote a page that did not feel like a teacher's notes anymore. Left is present. Right is promise. Promise is now policy. Policy is starting to erase present. She closed the book and looked out at Main Street as it actually stood. The boards still creaked. The hitching rail still leaned. The dog still slept in dust. The difference was not the wood. The difference was how many neighbors now felt a quiet impatience with the world that had failed to keep up with their eyes. Near the end of the month, a crate arrived marked Investment Views, second series. Quell unpacked it with careful hands and set the new pairs in a separate stack with a faint graphite dot on the back of each corrected card. He slipped one to May as if to prove a point. Depot Street, graded. On the left, the ground lay rough and familiar. On the right, a clean corridor cut through brush, and a survey stake wore a ribbon that no one had tied on the day May watched men measure. The ribbon meant nothing to a map and everything to a buyer. She set the card down and chose the word she had been avoiding. Replacement. If the first discrepancy can be explained away as nerves, how many nerves does it take to move a town? Keep your hour. We will need it when a street appears for one eye and refuses your other. A storm pushed through before dawn and left the trestle groaning like an old stair. By noon the creek had fallen, but the bank showed new scours and a pale scrape on one crossbeam. Kip Dalton's men found a wooden crate wedged under the west abutment, roped tight and marked with a neat stencil, Investment Views, second series. The lid had swollen, the nails held like teeth. Kip sent for May because she asked careful questions and did not waste anyone's time. They levered the lid in the schoolroom, not the bank. Quell arrived late and tried to make it a demonstration. Wardell called it recovered property and reached for the papers first. Amos stood back with his hands in his pockets and watched who flinched. Inside lay wrapped bundles of cards, each pair separated by thin spacers, each bundle tied with blue thread. A second layer held envelopes labeled in Quell's hand: survey lefts, salon rights, replacements. May opened survey lefts and found views she had seen: dust, leaned rails, honest stoops. She opened salon rights and found the corrected twins with straighter signs and cleaner steps. Then she lifted replacements and saw something new. Each envelope held a third card for the same caption, nearly identical to the right but gentler, where a skeptic would resist. The lamp softer, the shadow less assertive. The sky a shade duller, so depth felt less like a trick. It was a second promise designed to soothe a second doubt. Wardell said this was normal stock for travel. He used the word contingency and smiled like a man discussing extra nails. Amos asked why the crate had been hidden under a bridge instead of in the bank vault. Quell said the freight office had mislaid a shipment during the storm, and his face stayed calm. The porter at the depot later whispered to the postmistress that Quell himself had rolled a crate down the platform the night the river rose. Small towns have long ears. May sorted the envelopes into 3 stacks and read the pencil marks at the edges. A dot meant right first in showings. A small triangle meant fitted for difficult eyes. An arrow meant end on right while handing the pen. Replacements carried a faint circle she had not seen before, almost a watermark. She held a card to the window, and the circle resolved into 2 letters, RR. She asked Quell what the mark meant. He said Railroad Review. Kip looked at Wardell. Wardell looked at the floor. They tested a set on the room without saying so. Survey left, a rough grade where Depot Street might run. Salon right, a clean corridor with brush cleared and a ribbon on the stake. Replacement, the same corridor with the ribbon gone and the ground still firm. May felt her shoulders drop at the third card. Relief is a product, she thought, and put the 3 in order on the desk. Which one does the hand reach for when the number is empty? Quell tried to fold the discovery into his patter. He said investors deserve options because not every eye fuses depth the same way. He said replacements existed to spare headaches and keep good faith with hesitant buyers. Amos nodded at the phrase good faith, because it traveled well in letters upriver. Wardell said the company favored communities that could regulate their own uncertainty. He was selling discipline to the room and did not blush. The pastor arrived with rain still on his hat brim. He asked to see the labels and read each twice. If a promise comes with a spare, he said, put both promises on the same card and write today on the back of the one that is true. Quell thanked him for the counsel and set the suggestion aside. Suggestions that add friction do not survive long next to cash. Toward evening, the crate yielded a ledger of its own, pair numbers, show dates, and a column called Outcome. Many lines read Reserve. A handful read Convert, after replacement. 2 lines had a tidy note in Quell's hand. Doubles resolved with R. May traced those notes and remembered the list titled Reassure Again. She set the book down and asked a soft question. When a buyer asks to see the present again, why not show the left and let him think? Quell said, hesitance harms the room because doubt grows in other minds. He believed it. The crate believed him. The postmistress found a thin packet under the bottom layer, 6 pairs bound with twine and labeled Founder's Salon. The lefts were plausible. The rights were not from any street within 20 miles. The hotel porch belonged to a river town, 2 counties east. The warehouse showed a window pattern from a mill upriver. Regional resemblance can be stretched until it becomes theft. Amos touched the packet once, then put it back without meeting May's eyes. That night, Kip took a copy of Trestle at Dry Creek to the boarding house and set it by his plate. He stared at the right card and frowned for a full minute, then slid the replacement beside it. "That one sits better," he said to no one, "but I still want pay for the day the left remembers. Men who work on beams think in wages, not captions. Replacements do not cross a creek in the rain." Word of the crate spread in the slow way that still gets everywhere. A farmer came into the bank with his certificate and asked for the version of Main Street that matched the replacement, not the salon right. He wanted quieter improvement, not the parade. Amos said certificates secure position, not edits, and handed him a confidence coupon. The coupon satisfied the hand and did not answer the question. The school board asked May whether she had misplaced her caution. She said her caution was working fine and asked for a drawer instead of a shoebox to keep the lefts. The board gave her a drawer. Wardell did not object in public. In private, he visited the clerk and suggested that lefts be consolidated for storage efficiency. Consolidation is a gentle word for bury. Quayle began introducing the replacement last in private fittings. He found that men who had scoffed at the polished right would sign after the kinder right with the same caption. He wrote this in his book with a neat 2 rand and a small smile. "The eye likes to be met halfway," he told Amos at the doorway. "So does a purse." The sentence made Amos uncomfortable because it was both accurate and noisy. May took 3 cards home, left, right, replacement, and laid them on her table under lamplight. She checked shadows against the hour she had told him on the first day. The left sat within a teacher's tolerance. The right asked for a nudge in belief. The replacement asked for less and got more. She wrote a line that felt like a verdict. When promise softens, trust hardens. Then she closed the book and listened to the actual street breathe. Near the end of the week, a new circular appeared with a firmer tone. Parallax Club, consistent program. All views corrected to reflect improvements under consideration. Replacement views available for comfort. The word comfort did a lot of work for a single noun. People prefer comfort to argument when money is on the table. Before the crate was emptied, the porter finally spoke to May outright. He said a second box had been rolled down the platform on the storm night and never reached any office. Wardell said he would inquire. Amos said he would reconcile inventory. Quayle said the freight always loses something in weather. The town grew quiet the way a mouth does when a tooth begins to ache. A missing box full of promises is still a missing box. If a program can swap one future for a softer one without breaking the caption, how far can captions travel before they are only names? Keep your hour close. We will need it when the map arrives with streets that agree with one eye and not the other. The salon opened on a Thursday with a carpet borrowed from the hotel. Quayle charged $1 and called it a private evening for founders and friends. The pianist played slow pieces that made the room feel well measured. Amos poured small glasses of wine and watched hands, not faces. Wardell stood by the door and counted tickets in his head. Quayle began with the familiar pairs and a patient voice. Left to present the survey, right to reflect intended improvements. He never said edited, and he never needed to. People repeated his nouns back to him like students with good ears. When a murmur rose, he shifted to the replacement and let shoulders drop together. Relief sells faster than polish. Midway, he added a new device to the show. He called them citizen views and kept them behind a ribbon. The cards looked like street scenes with people set at easy angles, a couple by a storefront, a clerk on a step, a child with a hoop. The right card always held one more face than the left. The extra face smiled at the camera just enough to make belonging feel normal. May leaned forward and asked a quiet question. Were these taken here or borrowed from upriver? Quell said the county shares its best selves across regions when a picture needs encouragement. He wore the word share the way Wardell wore spur. It fit until you tested the seam. After the show, she requested a closer look at 3 pairs labeled Citizen Frontage. In one, a woman in a dark dress stood by a lamppost on Depot Street. In another, the same dress stood near the hotel porch 2 miles away. A week earlier, the dress had appeared in a Rivertown square. May traced the hem with her fingertip and kept her mouth closed. Clothes travel, so do faces. Amos noticed the same repetition and chose a banker's comfort. He called it branding and suggested the club stabilize its look. He said investors appreciate continuity in the human scale of a plan. Wardell liked the phrase and repeated it twice. Quell wrote it into his book beside a neat R and a dot. The salon had a second layer most guests never saw. Behind the curtain, 2 chairs stood by a neutral wall. Quell called it the confidence bench and invited respected townspeople to sit for a moment. He took a quick left and a quick right and slipped the pair into a folder labeled Reserve. Those faces appeared later in corrected views as porch sitters and steady shadows. The town learned to borrow itself in advance. The pastor arrived late and asked whether consent had been gathered. Quell said everyone pictured had attended and everyone pictured would be proud later. The pastor said pride differs from permission and asked for a list of names. Quell promised to compile one before Sunday. Sunday arrived with a sermon about Second Commandments and honest images. The list did not arrive. May kept a simple tally through the evening. Whenever a right card carried an extra person, the room signed faster and asked fewer questions. When the left and right matched in human count, pens moved slower. Presence had become a lever and did not admit it. She underlined the word lever and wrote it twice. Kip Dalton attended in his work shirt and stood near the back. He watched a corrected view of the trestle filled with men who looked cleaner than his crew. He asked if the company would pay for uniforms if pictures required polish. Wardell said the company rewarded safety and civic spirit. Kip said safety begins with boots and pay, not ribbons. Laughter rose and fell. He did not laugh. Near the end, Quell presented a set called Founder's Salon, delicate and persuasive. The right card showed a hotel porch with 3 familiar men reading newspapers. Amos recognized himself from the confidence bench and went very still. Wardell recognized his own jaw and adjusted his tie. Quell smiled and said, "A town builds faster when it can see its pillars already seated." May wrote one line without pause. Faces can be borrowed the way money can. The postmistress whispered that tickets now carried tiny marks near the corner. A square meant access to citizen views. A circle meant the confidence bench. A triangle meant corrected first. She had learned to spot the symbols when sorting invitations. Men with symbols brought other men without them. The room obeyed the marks more than it obeyed the speech. A visitor from upriver asked a sharp question that landed hard. If the right view borrows people, what keeps it from borrowing buildings? Quell said regional resemblance and civic intent cover minor substitutions. Amos said collateral exists across counties. Wardell said the railroad admires towns that act like their future. May heard a new word hiding in the answers. Replace stands behind, resemble when money knocks. After the chairs scraped, Quell held a small after-session for those with dots. He passed 2 cards that were both rights and told the room to fuse quickly. He complimented brisk minds and modern eyes. He ended with the same gentle script. Depth is proof. The phrase had stopped meaning anything new. It still worked. Back home, May laid 3 cards on her table and tested a clock again. The left sat close to the hour on the chalkboard. The right asked for belief and got it from tired eyes. The citizen view asked for belonging and got it from tired hearts. She wrote 3 simple sentences. People are devices. Consent can be trained. Belonging can be sold. The next morning a notice appeared beside the church board. Parallax Club, Community Participation. Volunteers may sit for citizen views and help our town show its best self. The word volunteer soothed a worry that should have stayed awake. By afternoon the confidence bench had a line. May asked Quell for one concession before the next salon. Keep a copy of every left wherever a right sells a certificate. He said the desk was already crowded and offered her another shoebox. She took it and labeled it with a pencil she did not intend to lend back. Shoeboxes are honest. They do not pretend to be vaults. Kip stopped her at the door and spoke low. If they can put a man on a porch he never stood on, they can put a rail where no train plans to run. She said he sounded like a sermon and asked whether he would testify when the time came. He said he would bring his boots and the day's pay stub. Boots and paper travel farther together than speeches. If a room can be taught to buy a street by meeting its future neighbors, what happens when the neighbors are the same 3 men in every town? Keep the hour you gave me. Soon we will check it against a map that promises more faces than ground. Grief arrived early that winter and stayed through spring. A fever took 2 children on River Road, then a brakeman 3 towns east. Funerals filled the calendar with ink that bled through the page. People wanted something to hold that did not shake in their hands. Quell noticed before anyone said it out loud. He announced lantern lectures for the Parallax Club and promised comfort with clarity. The schoolroom became a theater again. He hung a white sheet and darkened the lamps until the room breathed in one slow rhythm. He spoke softly about depth, the gift of 2 eyes, and the gentleness of science in a hard season. Then he showed pairs whose right cards had learned a new skill. Faces looked rested. Coats sat smooth on shoulders. Shadows softened at the mouth corners. He did not say retouching. He said care. Amos introduced bereavement certificates that held a family's place in a future block while they handled the present. The paper felt good and carried a forgiving date. He said the bank would honor the rate listed on the certificate whenever the family was ready. Wardell praised civic spirit and said grief should not break momentum. The room nodded because momentum sounded like mercy that did not pry. A merchant's wife asked if the club could make a stereograph from her husband's cabinet card. She wanted the feeling of presence, not just the proof of it. Quell said yes in a voice that promised tact. He paired the old portrait with a carefully staged twin and taught the brain to fuse a man who had already gone. The left stayed faithful. The right tidied what sorrow had roughened. The widow cried and called it a miracle. Quell called it service and wrote 2 neat initials under the mount. May watched expressions settle as people accepted what they were shown. She counted the seconds he let them look at the left before sliding the right into place. The count shortened when tears swam. The room surrendered faster when the heart led the eyes. She wrote 1 line and folded the paper in her palm. Comfort is persuasive when it arrives as proof. The club added a new phrase to its cards. Post-mortem parallax available by request. It sounded clinical and kind at the same time. Pastors disliked the term, but some parishioners brought it up themselves because grief makes language practical. Quell trained stewards to speak gently about restoring the likeness your memory deserves. It worked more often than anyone wished to measure. Kip Dalton came with his cap in his hands, and a question he hated. A man from his crew had fallen from the trestle, and Kip wanted a likeness for the wife who had no money for anything but bread. Quell waived the fee for the left and charged a small sum for the right. The right smoothed the man's bruised lip and lifted one corner of his gaze so he looked like the morning before. Wardell said the club was proud to serve working families. Kip said thank you and did not look at the second card twice. May asked Quell later whether they would mark adjusted images in any way. He reached toward a stack as if to demonstrate an ink stamp and then let his hand fall. "We adjust for love," he said. "What mark covers that without sounding cold?" She said, "Truth deserves ink even when ink looks hard." He changed the subject to lenses and focus and the cost of plates upriver. The lantern lectures grew crowded. Quell now arranged sequences to carry the room from present to promise to consolation. He paused on families whose left card had a vacant space and whose right card had learned to fill it with a presence that did not claim to be living. He framed the act as respect. He never used the word replace. The room did not either. Amos noticed a financial effect and wrote it in a private margin. Families who received a consoling rite returned sooner to finalize reservations. They asked for frontage near the square where they could be close to people. They signed faster when the card placed them among neighbors who already seemed present. He called the effect renewed engagement. The word fit inside letters to the board. Wardell measured the same pattern a different way. He tracked track talk. When a bereaved family returned to the desk within a month, their neighbors followed with deposits inside too. He said grief had learned to live beside progress. He praised the community for resilience and kept the phrase in a drawer with his sharper words. May walked home after one lecture with papers in her pocket and tried the simplest test again. The school clock, the angle of the moon, and the shadows on a new pair labeled Citizen Vigil. The left placed a cluster of townspeople by the hotel post, heads bowed. The right added one more figure near the edge, familiar in posture and coat. She checked the cabinet portrait that had provided the likeness for the widow's stereograph. The figure matched with a small improvement at the collar. It was not a fraud if you accepted the caption. It was not honest if you remembered the day. Which one would the room choose to remember? The pastor visited May with a quiet proposal. He wanted the club to keep a parallel file of the left whenever a family ordered a consoling rite. "If comfort travels," he said, "let truth travel beside it." May carried the request to Quell, who nodded and promised a shoebox. A shoebox arrived with the label Comfort Twins in Quell's neat hand. It filled quickly and lived under a table, far from the ledger that moved money. During one crowded evening, a girl named Elsie fainted at the back of the room. She had lost her brother in the spring and had come for the lantern because staying home felt worse. When the air returned to her face, she whispered that the right card made her feel like she had done something wrong by letting him go. The sentence entered May like a pin. Consolation had become a test. She wrote the sentence down and did not show it to anyone. A letter arrived from upriver asking for a traveling set of comfort views to help a Grange Hall raise funds. Wardell liked the idea and wrote a rate card. Amos preferred to call it cost recovery. Quell sorted duplicates and created a trunk labeled Salon Consolation. He included several replacement cards because some rooms needed softer, write more than polished right. The trunk left on a Tuesday and returned with thank you notes and a list of names who wanted certificates mailed. Kip brought a small pocket notebook to May and asked her to write 2 lines for him to remember. He said he could hammer iron and knot rope, but could not pin down slippery words. She wrote what he asked for in a clear hand. Boots and pay are safety. Pictures are not pay. He tore the page out and slid it under his cap. Men who balance on beams do not need more poetry. At the bank, a widow named Miriam arrived with a confidence coupon and asked whether it could be redeemed for something with fewer faces. She said the new cards made her feel surrounded by people she did not know who already knew where she should live. Amos offered her a left-only folder and a chair by the window. She left without signing and returned a week later with her sister. They chose a modest lot behind the school. Not every room needed the right to make a decision. The bank noted the exception and did not advertise it. The postmistress whispered another small truth as she sorted invitations. Dots had multiplied on tickets as lectures leaned into consolation. Squares gave access to citizen views. Circles led to the confidence bench. Triangles signaled corrected first. Now, a tear-shaped mark appeared by the corner for those most likely to ask for a comforting right. She said the mark matched a list in Quell's pocket. May did not like the shape or the accuracy. Mid-spring, a traveling photographer passed through with a stack of older stereographs from river towns. He sold them cheap to boys who liked machines. May bought one pair for a dime because the caption matched a recent club view. The lefts were cousins. The rights were twins. She turned the cards over and found initials that did not belong to Quell. Regional resemblance had crossed into regional reuse. She stored the pair in her drawer under a slip that read, "Borrowed Ground." Quell closed the season with a special lecture and a polished voice. He said the club had helped families hold their people close while building a town worth walking. He thanked the bank for patience and the railroad for interest. He praised the community for seeing clearly in a hard year. The room applauded because some sentences earn clapping even when they should earn questions. Then he ended on the old seal. Depth is proof. It still worked for men who needed it to work. May went home by the long way and stood at the corner where the map promised Depot Street. The ground was rough and held the day's heat. She pictured the right card, the softer right, and the left she had tucked into a shoebox no clerk would ever open by habit. She said the hour she had given him at the start and listened to the night, correct it by a breath. She wrote one last line before sleep and kept the pencil in her fist. When comfort edits memory, policy will follow the edit. Tomorrow she would test whether policy already had. The storm broke the ridge at midnight and kept breaking until noon. Culverts failed in a row. The creek climbed the bank, crossed the road, and carried fences away like kindling. By evening, the square smelled of wet plaster and coal oil. Men walked with lanterns where Depot Street was supposed to run and found brush, roots, and a scatter of washed stones. No graded bed, no corduroy, no cinders. The ground looked like it had never learned a straight line. Wardell turned the disaster into resolve before the mud settled. He said the flood proved the need for urgency and proper drainage. He said bonds could carry the town past inconvenience. Amos echoed him with quieter words and placed a neat stack of forms on the desk. Quell arrived with a trunk that had stayed miraculously dry and a voice that stayed miraculously calm. He said the Parallax Club would help citizens keep their sense of the plan. May brought the shoebox of lefts to the schoolroom and asked the clerk for the drawer the board had promised. The drawer had become a cupboard, and the cupboard had become a closet marked consolidation. Half the lefts had migrated into envelopes labeled for efficiency. She took what remained and set them beside the new flood circular. Then she walked the supposed corridor with a teacher's patience and a hand that knew plants by roots. Grass told her more than maps. Where a grader had passed, the roots would shear and the soil would lie tired. Here the roots curled happy and old. The only straight cuts were where the flood had shaved the bank. She found a survey stake with a ribbon that had not weathered. It's not fresh, and it's cut too clean. She left it alone and went back to the cards. Quell set up an evening session to soothe nerves and keep deposits from cooling. He presented a pair labeled Depot Street, graded, and spoke gently about setbacks and fortitude. The left card showed a clean corridor through brush, firm ground underfoot, and a line that invited the eye forward. The right card showed the same scene with a stronger horizon, the ribbon gone, and the claim of intention sharpened. May felt the wrongness before she could phrase it. The left had become promise, and the right had become policy. She asked to examine the mounts, and Quell obliged with a smile that missed her intent. The left bore a new pencil code she had not seen before, small and spare. L2. The right carried the familiar dot for corrected first. She held the left to the lamp and saw the faint circle that had once marked Railroad Review, then a second mark that read quietly like a shaved erasure. Someone had learned to replace the present with a gentler present, dressed as fact. Kip Dalton came in wet to the knees and set his boots on the mat. He said he had walked the corridor with a line and a nail and found nothing worth a carpenter's level. He picked up the left card and turned it once. "If this is left," he said, "then I need a raise for the hours we apparently worked while we were sheltering the wagons." Wardell told him to submit his claim with hazard notes. Kip said hazard begins with ground, not cards. Amos gathered 3 merchants at the bank the next morning and offered improvement bonds with slightly sweeter coupons. He said the flood had moved timelines, not intentions. He said holding a paper with a date would help their sleep. One merchant asked whether sleep would help the street appear. Amos met his eyes and admitted that paper could not shovel dirt. He still slid the bond across the desk and waited for the pen to settle. The pastor visited the closet marked Consolidation and asked the clerk for the rule that sent lefts out of reach. The clerk said space and order and handed him 3 envelopes labeled Retained. Inside lay lefts that agreed with muddy boots and right cards that agreed with mouths. The pastor stood in the hallway and chose his sentence carefully. If a calamity cannot make us open both eyes at once, what will? May compared 3 versions of the same caption on her desk. The original left from spring, dusty and true. The salon right from summer, polished and convincing. The new left labeled L2, gentle and firm, where a skeptic might resist. She checked shadows against the hour she had given Quell on the first day. The spring left sat within a teacher's tolerance. The salon right asked for belief and got it from a room that wanted progress. The L2 left asked for less, and that made it slip past guards that would have caught the shine. Quell adjusted his script to fit the season. He spoke of community resilience and the dignity of keeping appointments with the future. He said replacements existed to prevent headaches and honor prudence. He avoided the word replace and did not need to say edit. Everyone was tired. Tired rooms forgive vocabulary that would raise eyebrows in clear weather. A boy from the depot found a second crate lodged in driftwood below the trestle. The rope held, but the lid had split, and water had touched the top bundle. May dried the cards on the school tables using blotting paper and patience. The bundle read, "Survey lefts," yet 2 of the first 5 bore the L2 mark in light pencil, not the heavier spring hand. One carried an older mount trimmed to match a new caption. Regional resemblance had given way to regional harvest. Wardell posted a broadside urging citizens to stand firm and trust the sequence. He wrote that corrected views continue to reflect improvements under consideration and that replacement views exist for comfort in uncertain times. The words did their work. People chose comfort because shovels waited and stoves cooled. May pinned the broadside beside the attendance list and told her class to copy the weather that week. Children draw what they see. Their pages showed a creek, a broken fence, and a road that bent around a big rock. Kip brought a mason's string and stretched it from the bank to the oak by the old fence. He asked May to look with both eyes, and then with the scope. With both eyes the string sagged where the washout had eaten the bank. Through the scope the L2 left pulled the sag straight and made the earth behave. He cut the string and handed her the length. "Keep this," he said. "It sags honestly." Amos received a letter from upriver asking whether the reserve ledger matched the broadside schedule. He read the letter twice and set it under a blotter. Numbers traveled faster than gravel. He visited the schoolroom after dusk and found May sorting cards like evidence. He asked her what would satisfy her. She said a rule simple enough to follow in bad weather. If a right sells a certificate, the left that stood in that light stays within reach forever. Quell said the rule was lovely and impractical. He said rooms need fewer choices when nerves are sore. He said the work would slow and the line would thin. May answered without raising her voice. Some lines are supposed to thin when the ground is soft. He looked at the door and called the hour. She repeated it back and watched him lose a minute. By the week's end, the town had 3 versions of Depot Street and none underfoot. The club leaned harder on lanterns and sequins. The bank sold bonds with cleaner coupons. The railroad sent a quiet man to count signatures and measure appetite in the polite way companies do. The pastor wrote a sermon about scales and sagging lines and tried not to turn it into law. If floodwater can wash the present off the cards and leave the promise spotless, whose clock are we keeping? Hold the hour you told me at the start. In the next chapter, we will see what bond paper says when streets only exist for one eye. The flood gave Wardell language the railroad liked. He spoke about urgency, drainage, and keeping appointments with the future. Amos turned the same weather into paper. He drafted improvement bonds with coupons that felt good in the hand. The prospectus used clean phrases that traveled well upriver. Corrected views reflect intended improvements. Replacement views prevent discomfort. Maps to follow upon stabilization. None of it said where a grader had actually passed. May read the draft twice and circled the sentences that promised without telling on themselves. She asked for one addition in plain words. If a right sells a certificate, the left that stood in that light stays on file. Amos winced because files slow money. Wardell said escrow lived in schedules, not shoeboxes. Quell said comfort needed fewer choices when rooms were tired. May said tired rooms deserve one honest drawer. A man from St. Louis arrived with a narrow briefcase and careful shoes. He introduced himself as Harlan Cart, a bond attorney retained by a house that liked neat paper. He asked for ledgers, tickets, and any photographs used to solicit subscriptions. He did not ask for speeches. He asked for dates. He asked for where the lefts lived. The clerk offered the closet-marked consolidation and a polite smile. Cart asked for a table and time. He set 2 piles before he asked one question. Pile 1 held reservation certificates matched to right cards. Pile 2 held lefts with dates near those sales. He traced shadows across noon lines and compared lamplight to captions. He wrote totals in a small book with a pencil that did not squeak. He did not accuse anyone. He underlined outcomes that repeated. Convert after replacement. Convert after citizen view. Convert after lantern. The same 3 phrases appeared until the page looked rhythmic. Amos watched the pencil and began a second calculation in his head. Coupons must be paid on time. If subscriptions cool, coupons bite the bank. He asked May to sit with Cart and answer practical questions. She brought the shoebox and placed it between them like a witness. The attorney's face did not change when he saw the label, Comfort Twins. He only nodded and asked who decided which lefts moved to storage and which stayed within reach. Wardell produced boilerplate letters from the railroad with language that leaned forward without stepping. The company admires communities that regulate uncertainty. The company tracks appetite and order. The company favors alignments that reflect demonstrated civic intent. Cart read each letter and then set a damp pair of cards beside them. Depot Street, graded. He asked to visit the ground before lunch. He did not bring a scope. They walked the supposed corridor with Kip and a mason's string. The string sagged where water had eaten the bank. The cards did not sag. Cart noted the sag as a measure, not a metaphor. He asked Kip for names, hours, and dates when men had been called to the grade. Kip named rain days, not pay days. Cart wrote that down and did not comment. At the bank, Amos hosted 3 subscribers who had taken bonds on confidence and clean paper. Cart asked whether any had viewed the left during the sale. 2 had not known to ask. 1 had asked and been shown a replacement left labeled L2. He said the L2 card made his head quiet. He signed after the quiet. Cart circled L2 in his book and asked when that mark first appeared in town. May gave him a week and a storm. Quell offered context without being asked. He said stereographs help citizens form a stable idea in unstable months. He said write cards align hopes so men can act together. Cart asked who owned the hopes on paper when hopes drifted. Quell said the club served the community's eyesight. Cart said coupons do not care about eyesight. He placed 2 receipts beside a right card and tapped the dates. The tapping did more than any adjective could have done. The postmistress delivered a pouch of registered letters that had come back marked undeliverable. Several carried certificates for remote subscribers who had never attended a showing. Their envelopes held tissue-wrapped rights without survey twins. Cart added a column titled Mail Only and drew a small arrow to the word boilerplate. He had seen this before in other counties. Pictures jump a valley faster than graders do. Wardell sharpened his case in the language he knew. He said a flood always pushes maps. He said intention is continuity. He said the town had behaved as if the future were already standing, which is what railroads require. Cart agreed that behavior matters. Then he asked the one question rooms avoid. What does the certificate promise someone who never saw the left? The pastor offered a simple rule in the hearing room upstairs. If a right sells a debt, keep its left beside it for the life of that debt. He said it softly and looked at Amos, not Wardell. Amos held his eyes and said, the bank could live with that rule if the drawer stayed organized. Wardell said rules must not slow bond placement. Cart said rules exist to slow the wrong things. May and Cart built a small index the town should have built 6 months earlier. They matched right cards used in sales with the exact lefts made within 7 days of those captions. They found pairs where the left had been trimmed to fit a newer mount. They found L2 lefts in bundles labeled Survey. They found Citizen Views where the extra face had been borrowed from the confidence bench and used in 3 captions. Cart wrote the word reuse and did not raise his voice. Kip brought wage slips and laid them on the table. Dates, hours, and blanks where rain kept men home. Cart counted blanks beside sales. The numbers aligned too neatly with lantern nights and salon tickets. The pattern did not prove fraud. It proved method. Method sells as well as it builds. He underlined convert after lantern one last time and closed the book. Amos called a short meeting with Wardell and Quell in the back room. He said the bank could not float both coupons and corrections. He said the bond house would demand a certificate of photographic integrity. He said the town might face a hearing if they could not write that sentence without blinking. Wardell stiffened and said, investors understand weather. Amos answered that investors understand calendars and signatures. Quell said the club had acted in good faith. Amos said, good faith needs ink. Cart drafted 2 pages for the council with words the state understands. Maintain contemporaneous lefts within reach for all solicitations. Mark replacements clearly on the mount. Disclose citizen staging where used. Archive confidence bench faces separately from sales material. He added a final line that felt like a hinge. Corrected view implies intention. Implied intention is not an improvement under completion. The council posted a notice inviting citizens to bring any private pairs for comparison. May read the notice and felt the room tilt the same way it had tilted when the shoebox first filled. People folded envelopes twice before they stood. A widow brought a consoling right that placed her husband at the hotel post the month after he died. She set it beside the left May had kept and looked at both until her eyes ached. She asked a quiet question no card could answer. Which one will the bank remember when it writes our address? Wardell tried one more broadside with firmer type. The railroad remains committed to communities that keep faith with their plan. The broadside did not mention sagging string or L2 marks. It mentioned sequence and resolve. The bond house sent a telegram that mentioned neither. It asked for the attorney's report and a schedule for a hearing date. May wrote 3 lines in the smallest hand she could manage. Paper taught the eye. The eye moved the hand. The hand signed the debt. She closed the book and walked to the empty corridor where Depot Street was supposed to run. The ground smelled like last week. The cards in her pocket smelled like cabinets and glue. She said the hour she gave him at the start and waited. The clock in her head kept time. The next clock would be a judge's. If a town sells debt with pictures that never learned the ground, what does the seal certify? Keep your hour. In the next chapter, the question will stand in a room that answers with rulings, not relief. The council room smelled like paste and damp paper. Chairs scraped the floor and then went still. On the table lay reservation certificates, a stack of right cards, a shoebox of lefts, and Harlan Cart's narrow book. The judge set a stereoscope beside his gavel as if it were a witness that needed seating. Cart spoke first and did not change volume. He named dates, captions, and sales tied to corrected views without contemporaneous lefts on file. He described L2 marks appearing after the flood and citizen faces repeating across captions. He did not accuse intent. He described a method and let the totals hold their own weight. The room heard arithmetic and understood consequences. Wardle answered with continuity and weather. He said floods push schedules, not purpose, and railroads track appetite and order before steel. He called the program encouragement, not deception, and said replacements prevented headaches in unstable months. He tried to make improvement sound like a moving target that still counted as aim. The judge wrote 2 words and did not look up. Show left. Amos kept his language plain and close to money. He said coupons bite banks that confuse hope with completion. He admitted certificates had placed debt against pictures, then asked for a rule simple enough to follow during bad weeks. Keep the left that stood in that light within reach for as long as the debt lives. The sentence landed because it fit in a drawer. Quell said the club acted in good faith while teaching tired rooms to see together. He said citizen views showed belonging, and that L2 cards softened strain without changing intent. He used the word care where others wanted proof. May opened the shoebox and set 3 pairs down without commentary. Spring left, salon right, and the left labeled L2. The judge looked from the table to the scope and made the motion of a man choosing which eye to trust. Kip stood in his work shirt, cap in hand, and kept his comments short. He named rain days, named hours on the timbers, and named the places where ground never learned a straight line. Then he asked the only question he wanted the record to hold. If a picture puts a man on a beam, who pays him for that minute? No one tried a long answer. The judge wrote, hazard is ours. The pastor did not preach. He asked the court to write a rule that made truth and comfort walk in the same coat. Keep pairs, mark replacements, and file citizen staging where used. He finished with 1 line that sounded like a benediction and a warning. If hope sells, let hope sign its name. The judge took the stereoscope in both hands and did not rush. He viewed Depot Street graded, first with the left from Spring and then with the L2 left. He looked again with eyes alone. He set the scope down and spoke as if tired of adjectives. Corrected view is intention. Intention is not completion. Where corrected views sold debt without the left kept within reach, those solicitations fail the seal. The order that followed was plain and sharp. All sales tied to unfiled lefts were void unless reoffered with pairs on record. Replacement cards must carry ink on the mount and a date. Citizen faces used in sales must be consented and archived apart from captions. The bank would administer a reconciliation window. The railroad would receive a clean index after. No one cheered. People exhaled like men setting down a load they had carried too far. Wardell looked smaller when standing still. He said the company preferred clarity and would reconsider alignments after reconciliations. Amos nodded once and began drafting notices with calm hands. Quell asked whether the club could keep operating if it obeyed the drawer rule. The judge said yes, then added a sentence that removed comfort from command. The room chooses its eye. The clerk keeps both. Cart closed his narrow book and left his card for the bank. He told May the index they built would outlive everyone in the room if someone dusted it. She slid the shoebox toward the clerk and asked for a ledger that was not made of cardboard. The clerk brought a drawer and a key that did not bend. Outside, citizens unfolded envelopes and held 2 pictures in light for the first time. Some returned rights that felt too polished now that lefts were awake again. Others kept both and wrote their addresses on the back of the present with steady hands. Kip bought new boots and said the string still sags where truth does. The pastor posted a short notice that used no italics and asked for no applause. We will keep pairs. That night May sat at her table with 3 cards and the hour she told you at the start. She checked shadows against the clock and found her own patience back where it belonged. She wrote one last line and closed the book without flourish. When both eyes agree, promises stop needing better names. The lamp gave a small pop. The room held still. The street outside remained the street both eyes could confirm.